notice to clean up the mine, to shut the equipment down, to low production and whatnot. So actually it all looked good to the state inspectors. And it was nothing but a matter of greed and lies through all of these years to the men who worked there. But the big tragedy is that Mr. Lovick was aware of the fact also that this is the product, the tailings, which actually is the garbage, you might say, of after getting the mineral out, was brought into town and put on the high school running tracks and put around the school systems for the children to play on. And some of these tailings were nearly 100% tremolite. And I think that's the biggest tragedy of Libby, is that the company allowed this to happen. Nobody stood up, and even in 1999, no one stood up and said that this material had been placed at the schools. And it wasn't until nearly 2001 that I found the documents about the high school running tracks and faxed them to the superintendent of schools, and the EPA started investigating, and they were completely stunned with what they had found. And not only was it on the running tracks, all of the high school equipment, the football equipment, all of the young children's baseball equipment was all contaminated and had to be replaced. And it was only a few days ago they found out that one of the mats from track had been taken from the high school and taken over to the middle school. And they found that this mat was contaminated and had been laying there for 10 years. So it's just one tragedy on top of another. And basically, for my husband and myself, I felt that, yes, I have the disease. My father worked there. I played in it. I went up to the mine site with him. That I accept the fact that I do have this material in my lungs. My husband, on the other hand, never worked at the mine, never played at the mine, simply by living in Libby as a small boy, has the disease. But even that we're willing to accept. But the next 2 generations, the 3 generations of children have been exposed to this terrible fiber at a very young age. And 9 out of my 11 grandchildren attended Plummer School, which had an ice skating rink that was simply made out of tailings. And 9 months out of the year, the children would play in this. They would have wrestling matches. It was the most popular place on the playground at recess time. So technically, a child's first day of latency is the first day of kindergarten. And I think that's the biggest tragedy of this whole situation, and that people at the mine, people who were the head of the company, knew how toxic this material was. And even after the EPA came, they simply did not come forward and say, oh my God, we put it here, here, and here. The EPA, it was really a hide-and-seek game to try to find this material, and they're still finding, like I said, with the mats from track, from the high jump mats. This was only just in the last few days. Someone realized those mats originally had been at the high school, and they were still contaminated.
Gayla, why do you stay in Libby? Why does your family stay there? Your husband is now in the hospital?
He just got out. He just got out of the hospital again. But, you know, people ask me that. They said, why didn't you just move? And I've lived here for over 60 years. This is my home. And I could be like other people and simply walk away and not say anything and let it continue. But what good would that do? The same people would have died in the last 10 years that died. My husband, I was in Missoula at the trial. He attended and represented the family at the funeral of a friend who died as a result of asbestos exposure. A man who had never worked at the mine but developed lung cancer due to the asbestosis. And no, you can only run so far, but even if we left, we would still carry the fiber in our lungs. And people would continue to be exposed. So at some point, things have simply got to stop. You've got to put your foot down and say enough is enough. And this is what I felt in 1999 when I wanted the EPA or somebody to come in and investigate.
This is our final excerpt of the feature documentary, Libby, Montana. This clip also shows former plant manager Earl Lovick, but it begins with Paul Peckerard, the EPA emergency on-scene coordinator. He talks about a memo that Lovick wrote in the 1960s.
There's 2 internal memos, one from 1969, written by a guy named Earl Lovick. And the main feature of this memo is a graph where they had actually plotted out, and it's a weird y-axis. They call it lung disease. They're not more specific than that. And then they have years of employment. And their 20-year employees, the percent with dying, this is not a marker of they have it. This is deaths of 92% of their 20-year employees were dying of lung disease. The average, and then set with the 10-year, I haven't drawn my curve very well, but at 10 years, it was 41%. So on average, 41% of the Libby workers are dying from asbestosis, mesothelioma, and they knew that in '69.
And does that appear to be a memo from you to Mr. Kelly dated January 2, 1965?
Yes, sir.
The next page, do you see a listing of normal chests and abnormal chests?
Yes, sir.
Do you see Alan Boothman?
Yes, sir.
Did he die of lung disease?
I don't recall what he died from. He died. I know that, but I don't recall what his cause of death was.
The next one, Robert Koenar, did he die of lung disease?
Yes, sir.
Jack Garrison, did he die of lung disease?
Yes, sir.
Bernie Hamilton, did he die of lung disease?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
Lewis Hoppy, did he die of lung disease?
No, he drowned.
And Michael McNair, did he die of mesothelioma?
Yes, sir.
And Lloyd Miller, did he die of lung disease?
Yes, sir.
Richard Rayome, did he die of lung disease?
Yes, sir.
Stuart Risley, did he die of lung disease?
I don't know.
Harold Shrewsbury, did he die of lung disease?
I don't know.
And L.D. Welch, that would be Lilas Welch, did he die of lung disease?
That was certainly a contributing factor.
At this point in 1965, was any information given to these employees that inhaling asbestos dust could be dangerous and hazardous to their health?
Well, you have asked this question before today, and specifically, I don't know that we gave any specific information on the hazardness of asbestos or whatever.
Again, all of those clips are from the feature documentary Libby, Montana, which had its national broadcast premiere on PBS's POV in 2007. Their website is www.pbs.org/POV. As we wrap up with you, Gayla Benefield, then after break we'll turn to two reporters who have been on this story now for a while. I wanted to ask you what this trial in Missoula that is taking place right now means to you, and if you want to comment on that last clip that we've all been listening and watching.
Well, yes, after listening to the clip, the majority of the men I knew, they worked with my father. They had children who are my age, and now they have grandchildren. And the majority of those men's families have been affected by this. Mr. McNair's wife died a horrific death from asbestosis. All of her children are diagnosed, and now her grandchildren. And it goes down the line, the same with the Garrisons, all the way down the line, the Konars. And this is the real tragedy that plays out. These men died in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, but now at this point in time, the families are suffering the same, and they've already watched a family member die, just like I myself have. They know what their future is going to be. And this is probably one of the biggest reasons that the trial is so important to me, and it was so important to Les, to finally get these people on the stand and to try them in front of a jury of their peers. But if the jury is able to hear all of the evidence, and this is able to go to jury, it will be a miracle. I have been down back and forth to Missoula watching the trial, and I swear if O.J. Simpson had had Grace's lawyers, O.J. would have been nominated for sainthood by the time they got done with him. I mean, this is it's really tragic because the trial is turning into a bit of a sham also, and we're only hopeful that hopefully the trial will go to jury, and the jury will be allowed to make the decision on W.R. Grace, and we all can get some closure from this.
The company W.R. Grace went bankrupt in 2001. You've never gotten any compensation to this point? No, there's no compensation, and right now they're getting ready to finish up the bankruptcy, and
the individuals may get $3,000 or $4,000, which doesn't even cover a year's supply of medication. Right now, W.R. Grace is paying our medical bills. It's an administrative policy, and they are paying for our medical bills and have been since 2001. But that can stop at any time, and that was sort of a goodwill gesture. I'm not sure why it was even enacted. But it has enabled people to have a little more quality of life, to afford the medication. My husband's medication and mine combined probably is about $500 a month, simply for the medication to be able to breathe and to have somewhat of an active life. But therein again, my biggest concern is because the latency period